It's easy to overlook how deliberate people can be in the smallest, most seemingly insignificant gestures. And women in particular often communicate in a way that's layered, not direct, not obvious, but profound in its subtlety. When a woman starts to shift her appearance ever so slightly, and especially in contexts where she knows you'll notice, that's not accidental, that's not random. That's a psychological cue, a form of signaling rooted in biology, emotion, and unspoken desire. You'll notice it if you're paying attention, and most men aren't. One day her hair is done differently. The next it's the way she walks into a room. It's more composed, almost like she's preparing for a moment she wants to matter. She's not doing it for the world. She's doing it for the one person she's hoping will actually see her. And that's the thing. Most of what's meaningful in a woman's emotional expression isn't broadcasted for everyone. It's selective, it's refined, it's targeted. It's a quiet attempt to enter your psychological frame without ever having to verbalize her presence. Now, this isn't just about vanity or aesthetics. It's not merely about wanting to look good. It's about creating a response in you, a reaction. Attraction, when it's emotionally charged and psychologically rooted, isn't loud, it's precise. So when a woman changes something about how she looks, not drastically, but just enough, it's often because she wants to feel like she has a certain power in your perception. She wants to be noticed by you, not everyone, you. And here's the fascinating part. She may never say it. In fact, she probably won't. Because saying it removes the mystery. It forces clarity, and clarity forces vulnerability. And vulnerability opens the door to rejection. That's why she won't walk up to you and say, I did this for you, but she hopes you'll feel it. She hopes your unconscious will register that something's different. Something about her draws you in more than usual. And if it does, if you respond to that shift, even subtly, she'll feel it was worth it. This dance is part of an age-old psychological ritual. It's been happening for thousands of years, just in different forms. Today it's mascara instead of jewelry from a different tribe. It's the curve of a smile rather than a ceremonial dress. But the principle is the same. Presentation becomes communication. And in the domain of male-female dynamics, these signals are not arbitrary. They're rooted in evolution, in the desire to be chosen, to be valued, and most deeply, to be seen. What's tragic is how often men miss this. They think she's just looking good today. They chalk it up to coincidence. But in that moment, they're missing an invitation, not a verbal one, but a psychological one. An invitation to engage, to respond, to notice her, not as an object of beauty, but as a person who's offering attention in disguise. And when that invitation goes unnoticed, over and over again, she retreats. She begins to internalize the idea that perhaps her silent communication isn't effective, or worse, that she wasn't enough to be noticed in the first place. This is where emotional intelligence becomes crucial. You have to learn to observe without assumption. Watch the patterns. Look at when the changes happen. Did she always wear that perfume, or did that start after you two spoke more often? Did she begin wearing that shade of color after you complimented it once, maybe even months ago? Is it coincidence, or is it a carefully calculated move designed to see if you'll pay attention to detail? You don't have to obsess over it, but you do have to notice it, because this is how women often initiate emotional interaction, not through words, not through texts or direct confession, but through presence, through elegance, through subtle shifts in how they present themselves in the environment they share with you. And it's not about manipulation either. It's not some shallow game. It's about feeling emotionally safe. When a woman doesn't know if she'll be rejected or embarrassed, she will express interest in a way that protects her dignity. A slight change in appearance gives her room to hide if you don't react, but it also gives her a thread of hope to follow if you do. That's what she's weighing, that's what she's testing, without ever making it explicit. When you can pick up on those signals, when you can learn to recognize emotional communication without waiting for literal confirmation, you become someone who understands not just what a woman says, but what she means. And that makes all the difference. Because being truly seen without a word being spoken is one of the rarest and most powerful feelings a person can experience. There's a strange power in silence. People often assume that not speaking equates to not caring, but that's a mistake, especially when you're dealing with a woman who's emotionally invested but uncertain. When she goes silent, when she doesn't reach out, when she seems to vanish quietly into the background of your life, it's not necessarily a sign of indifference. More often than not, it's a calculated strategy, a psychological maneuver, a way of preserving self-respect while still staying emotionally present. That silence, it's not absence, it's pressure. It's her way of creating a space you can't ignore. Think about it. When someone loudly demands your attention, your defenses go up. You either respond out of obligation or feel manipulated. But when someone removes themselves from your world, yet does so in a way that keeps them lingering in your mind, now that's psychological leverage. It forces you to fill in the blanks. It makes you wonder why she hasn't said anything. It makes you replay old conversations. It forces you to confront your own indifference or hesitation. And in that space of uncertainty, she becomes more present than ever before. This isn't about playing games. It's about protecting vulnerability. Because if she were to message you, reach out, pour her feelings into a text or a call, she'd be opening the door to potential humiliation. But if she simply stops reaching out, lets you sit in that emotional vacuum, she gives you all the room you need to reveal your intent without ever sacrificing her own dignity. That's what silence offers her. It's a boundary and a signal at the same time. You have to understand how profoundly relational this behavior is. We're wired to respond to social feedback. We notice when someone pulls away, especially if there was previously emotional engagement. When she goes quiet, she's not disappearing. She's entering a different form of communication. It's nonverbal, it's strategic, it's the emotional equivalent of holding her breath and watching to see if you'll notice the shift in air. And if you do, if you really do, you'll realize she was never gone. She was waiting to see if her absence would mean anything to you at all. There's an illusion many men fall into that if a woman isn't chasing them, then she doesn't care. That if she isn't texting, calling, reaching out, reacting to their posts, or showing signs of availability, she's moved on. That's not always true. Some of the most intense emotional pressure a woman can apply is silence. Because silence demands that you do the work, that you initiate, that you reflect, and maybe even regret. For silence isn't about revenge or ego, it's about maintaining balance. Because if she's the one always reaching out, always checking in, always trying to keep something alive that you're not contributing to, then she's diminishing herself. And women with any emotional intelligence, women who value themselves, don't sustain that dynamic for long, so they pull back, they withhold, not to punish you, but to reclaim a sense of control over their own emotional experience. And that silence, if you're even slightly attuned to her patterns, it's deafening. You start to notice when she stops liking your posts, when she stops watching your stories, when her name no longer pops up on your notifications. She's not blocking you out of anger. She's detaching herself from the outcome. She's letting go without ever saying she is. And in that letting go, she becomes more emotionally powerful than if she'd poured her heart out to you in full sentences. This form of communication is deeply feminine. It's elegant in its restraint. It's rooted in a need to be pursued, to be recognized, but without begging for it. Her silence asks a question louder than any words could. Do I matter to you if I'm not standing in front of you reminding you of my existence? And if the answer is no, if your actions show you don't notice or don't care, then she walks away with her self-respect intact. And you're left wondering what could have been but never was. The psychological brilliance of strategic silence. It reveals more than confrontation ever could. It doesn't create chaos. It creates clarity. Not because she explains herself, but because she forces you to reflect on your own behavior without offering you the emotional escape of her words. And that kind of reflection, when honest, is profoundly uncomfortable. It's the discomfort of realizing that you were being spoken to all along, you just didn't know how to listen. When you understand that her silence isn't absence, it's a test, you begin to see her not as distant, but discerning. And that discernment, that's the signal you were never trained to see. You'll find that one of the most powerful ways a woman tries to get your attention without ever saying a word is through emotional contrast. Not loud, not dramatic, but subtle shifts that you feel rather than hear. One day she's warm, soft-spoken, maybe even inviting. The next she's distant, restrained, almost indifferent. And you're left thinking, what changed? That shift is not accidental. It's deliberate. It's psychological. It's meant to draw you in, not push you away. And unless you understand the deeper motive behind it, you'll misinterpret the entire experience. Human beings are wired to notice inconsistency. When something breaks a pattern, our brain assigns it importance. It registers it as significant. So when she shows up differently, when she suddenly withdraws her warmth or alternates between openness and emotional reserve, it triggers curiosity. It makes you wonder what's going on behind the surface. That curiosity, that psychological tension, it creates an internal chase, and she knows it, not consciously, always, but emotionally. She knows the moment she becomes a puzzle, you begin to seek the missing pieces. You may ask, why not just say what she feels? Why not express it clearly? And that's a fair question, but it misses the underlying point. The way many women process emotional interest isn't always direct. It's more about emotional signaling, revealing just enough to provoke an internal response in you, but not enough to risk full exposure. Because if she tells you outright, she gives you control over the outcome. But if she can make you feel her presence through contrast, through that subtle pull-push dynamic, then she maintains both her mystery and her leverage. Now, this doesn't mean she's being manipulative. In fact, this behavior often comes from a place of insecurity or self-protection. She wants to know that you're emotionally attuned to her, that you notice when she withdraws, that her distance matters to you. And this back and forth rhythm, it's her way of testing if her emotional presence even registers on your radar. If it doesn't, and no woman wants to be invisible in the presence of the man she's emotionally invested in, it's not just what she does when she's around you that matters, it's what changes when she's not. And she watches for that closely. She'll pull back slightly, emotionally or physically, and wait to see if you close the gap. That distance, even if it's just an inch, becomes the entire test. Do you step in? Do you even notice? Or do you respond to her emotional shift with your own indifference? That tells her everything she needs to know about your depth of interest and your ability to read between the lines. You have to understand that emotional contrast is incredibly stimulating. It creates an emotional voltage. It wakes people up. When things are flat, predictable, always the same, our nervous system tunes out. But when something fluctuates, when warmth suddenly becomes cold and affection turns quiet, it disrupts the emotional pattern. That disruption creates a moment of reflection. It pulls you out of autopilot. It makes you reevaluate everything she said, everything she did, and everything you didn't say in return. And here's the difficult part for most men. If you're not psychologically aware, you'll respond the wrong way. You'll take her coldness at face value. You'll assume she's lost interest. So you'll match it. You'll pull back too. And now both of you are locked in silence, neither willing to break the tension, both waiting for the other to blink first. That's how connections die, not with a loud fight, but with a quiet, prolonged absence of recognition. One emotional withdrawal meets another, and what could have been intimacy becomes distance. But if you're attuned, if you understand the rhythm behind the contrast, you'll realize that her emotional distance isn't necessarily rejection. It's actually a question. Will you come closer if I step back? Will you reach for me when I stop reaching for you? That's the test. That's the moment of truth. Not because she wants you to chase endlessly, but because she wants to feel that her presence matters enough that you notice its absence. When she creates contrast, it's not to confuse you, it's to be seen more clearly. To see if the connection you share is strong enough to survive a moment of doubt, a little silence, a little coldness. If it is, then that emotional contrast becomes a foundation for something deeper, something real. If it's not, if you retreat or disengage, then she walks away with her answer, and you never even knew the question was being asked. That's how she speaks, not with her mouth, but with the space she creates around her. You can tell a lot about what a woman wants by how she positions herself in your environment without ever needing to speak a word. Presence, when it's intentional, is powerful. It isn't just about proximity. It's about timing, energy, and visibility. When she deliberately shows up where she knows you'll be, when she lingers just long enough to be noticed, but not long enough to seem obvious, that's not coincidence, that's strategy. She's putting herself in your field of vision as a form of silent communication, hoping you'll pick up on the signal without her having to spell it out. Now you may say, well, maybe she just happened to be there. Sure, and maybe once or twice. That's true. But patterns are revealing. If she repeatedly crosses paths with you in places she never used to be, or seems to always be around when you're around, that's not just life playing a trick. That's a deliberate presence designed to nudge your attention, to remind you that she exists, that she's near, and that maybe, just maybe, there's something unspoken lingering between you both. You have to understand that most women, especially those who've been hurt before or have guarded hearts, often prefer to let their presence speak before their voice does, because words require vulnerability. If she says too much, she risks rejection. But if she can just be seen, if she can make you notice her without opening herself up to that emotional gamble, then it's a safer bet. It's less about expressing her feelings overtly and more about creating a space where you can approach if you're attuned enough to see it. This kind of behavior is common among women who are emotionally cautious but still curious. They don't want to initiate directly because that requires them to abandon the protective layers they've carefully built. So they opt for proximity. They place themselves where they'll be seen but never quite close enough to demand attention. It's a paradox. They want connection, but they want you to earn it first by noticing the clues. They're looking to see if you have the emotional intelligence to interpret silence as a form of communication. And that's a crucial point, emotional intelligence. Most men are so conditioned to look for explicit signs, text messages, direct flirtation, verbal interest, that they completely overlook the power of passive cues. They wait for clarity, for certainty, and miss the subtler gestures that carry just as much meaning. But in relationships, the unspoken is often more revealing than what's said out loud. That pause in conversation, that extra second of eye contact, the way she shifts in her chair when you enter the room, it all adds up to something that isn't nothing. So if she consistently makes herself available to be noticed, especially in environments where she knows you'll be present, take that seriously. Ask yourself why she's there. Ask yourself why she pauses when she sees you, why her demeanor shifts ever so slightly in your presence, why she glances and then quickly looks away. That's not randomness, that's not indifference. That's someone testing the waters without diving in. That's someone saying, I'm open, but only if you're willing to look deeper. And here's where many men go wrong. They either overlook these signs entirely or they misread them as casual. They don't understand how much emotional effort it took for her to just show up. For her, being there is already a stretch. It's a risk. It's a quiet form of hope wrapped in uncertainty. She's waiting to see if you'll meet her halfway, not with grand gestures, but with awareness. If you're too distracted or disconnected to notice her subtle cues, she won't chase clarity. She'll just withdraw and you'll wonder what you missed. This is especially true if she's emotionally conflicted, if she feels something for you but isn't sure how safe it is to act on it. She might be battling fear, past trauma, or just a general hesitation rooted in experience. So instead of reaching out, she hovers on the edges. She won't risk direct rejection, but she will give you every opportunity to approach, to initiate, to decode the silence correctly. And that's where your presence becomes just as important as hers. If you can't respond to her quiet gestures, she won't escalate them. She won't beg for attention or force intimacy. She'll simply assume you're uninterested and she'll retreat, possibly for good. That moment where you had the chance to engage, to acknowledge her silent expression of interest, will vanish, and she'll carry the weight of that unanswered question with her. Not with bitterness necessarily, but with the kind of quiet sadness that comes from being unseen when you finally found the courage to be near someone. So the next time you see her show up without explanation, or you notice her lingering presence in places where you are, understand that she might be reaching out, not with words, but with nearness. And sometimes that's the bravest thing she can do. There's something remarkably subtle about the way a woman uses silence, not just as absence of sound, but as a deliberate presence. It's not passive, it's not weakness. It's a calculated form of expression that demands you tune into more than just her words. Silence can become a language of its own, especially when she wants your attention without explicitly asking for it. And often, that silence is louder than any declaration. It's the way she lets a moment linger longer than it should, the way she doesn't reach out, but doesn't completely disappear either. She's creating space, a space filled with possibility, tension, and meaning. And here's the thing most men don't understand. Silence from a woman who cares isn't indifference. It's restraint. It's self-protection wrapped in emotional discipline. She might ache to hear from you, but she'll hold herself back. Not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much. Because she knows what it feels like to make herself emotionally available and be met with apathy or confusion. So she chooses silence not as a sign that she's moved on, but as a challenge, an invitation for you to feel the void she creates and to decide what you're going to do about it. We are far too conditioned to believe that love must be loud and obvious, that it must show up in texts and calls and outward confessions. But in reality, some of the deepest emotional undercurrents are completely nonverbal. A woman might retreat and go quiet, not to push you away, but to see if you notice the distance. She's watching to see if her absence changes anything for you, because if it doesn't, she learns something. And if it does, she learns something else. And that silence, it can be seductive. It makes you wonder. It forces your mind to fill in the blanks. Was it something you did? Is she waiting for you? Has she truly let go? It pulls your focus in precisely because it doesn't give you any obvious cues to react to. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to your uncertainty, your desire, your sense of connection. That's not manipulation. That's communication at a deeper level. It's a psychological mirror reflecting back your level of investment. She might show up around you, her body language saying one thing while her words say nothing. That combination, presence without pressure, can be magnetic. She's not chasing, she's not confronting, she's simply being. And in that being, she's saying, I'm here, I see you, do you see me? But she won't repeat the question, she won't plead for your attention, she'll wait for your awareness to catch up to her emotional subtlety. And if it doesn't, she'll quietly adjust her expectations and vanish without a trace. And that's the part that stings the most. How someone can be so emotionally present and yet slip away so easily when they feel unseen. That's the silent heartbreak many men experience too late, when they realize she was always communicating, just not in the way they were trained to notice. Because this kind of emotional nuance isn't taught, it's felt. And if you've spent your life only looking for bold signs, you'll miss the woman who was whispering through her silence. Women often use this approach because they've learned that directness doesn't always yield results, that vulnerability can be punished, that being too available can cost them their dignity. So they retreat behind a quiet strength, hoping the right man will have the depth to see it, hoping someone will recognize that silence can be sacred, that it's not a void, but a veil that invites you to look more closely. Now, most men won't step into that silence. They'll misinterpret it as closure instead of a doorway. They'll think, well, I guess she's not interested, and they'll move on, never realizing how much courage it took for her to simply stay silent in the hope that he'd be the one to speak. But for the man who listens with more than just his ears, for the man who understands that silence can carry meaning, he'll recognize what she's doing. He'll feel it. And if he values her, he'll respond not by demanding answers, but by leaning in, by showing up, by letting her know he's aware. Because silence, when used this way, is never meant to last forever. It's a temporary pause, an emotional checkpoint. It's her way of asking, can you hear what I'm not saying? And if the answer is yes, if you can attune yourself to her quiet signals, then you've stepped into something deeper than just attraction. You've entered the realm of emotional resonance. That's where real connection begins, not in the noise, but in the spaces between it. There's a unique kind of tension that exists between what we feel and what we allow ourselves to express. For many women, this tension becomes the foundation of how they engage emotionally, especially when they're drawn to someone but choose not to verbalize it. And one of the more subtle, often overlooked ways she tries to get your attention without saying a word is by elevating her presence in spaces she knows you occupy. Not to confront, not to pursue, but to be seen, to exist in your awareness just long enough to make you wonder. It's a kind of emotional choreography, quiet but deliberate, where her actions are carefully placed and intentionally restrained. She might show up more often in the places where she knows you'll be, socially, online, or even in mutual circles, but not in a way that appears forced. It's not random. There's a calculated simplicity in how she makes herself visible without being obvious. Maybe she posts something more frequently. Maybe she walks a little taller when you're around. Maybe she wears that perfume she knows you noticed once. Maybe she smiles in a way that lingers for just a second longer than necessary. These gestures seem small, but they're not arbitrary. They're crafted, they're signals, and they often carry more weight than 100 texts ever could. It's not that she's afraid to communicate directly, though sometimes, yes, fear plays a part. But more than that, she doesn't want to seem needy. She doesn't want to expose her longing in a way that could be dismissed or misunderstood. So instead, she turns herself into a symbol, a presence that you can't quite shake. You'll find yourself thinking about her without knowing why. And that's not coincidence. That's precision. She's reminding you she exists, but she's doing it in a way that protects her pride. And this isn't manipulation. It's self-preservation through elegance. She might feel deeply, but she's learned that emotional exposure can come at a high cost, that being too forward can shift the power dynamic, can make her look desperate in a world that often punishes women for being vulnerable first. So she expresses herself in whispers instead of declarations, in shadows rather than spotlights. It's subtle because it has to be, because the moment she steps over a certain threshold, she knows the risk of being perceived differently. And once that perception shifts, it's very hard to regain balance. This is why you'll often find women who are deeply interested in someone but who play it cool, not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much. And in feeling too much, they fear rejection more deeply. So instead of saying, "I miss you," she might simply like your post or mention a memory the two of you share in a casual way. That's not a throwaway comment. That's a breadcrumb. It's an invitation to notice. She's not throwing herself at you. She's leaving the door cracked, hoping you're paying enough attention to step through it. And sometimes it's not even about being noticed in a direct sense. It's about being remembered. If you bring her up in conversation and she seems to light up a little, or if you see her maintaining connections to the people or places tied to you, that's a kind of emotional tether. She's not letting go of the bond even if she's not actively pulling on it. She's keeping it intact quietly and consistently. And that takes effort. It takes emotional commitment to stay present in someone's orbit without demanding their attention. That's a powerful form of restraint because it means she's giving you space while still holding space for you. But here's the paradox. If you're not attuned to these signals, you'll miss them completely. You'll assume she doesn't care. You'll interpret her distance as disinterest. And once that narrative solidifies in your mind, the opportunity for reconnection often disappears. You've written a story in your head that wasn't true, but by the time you realize it, she's already started to fade for real. Because here's the hard truth. Women may be patient, but they're not infinite. Silence has a shelf life. If her unspoken signals go unanswered for too long, she'll shift from hoping to healing. And once she enters that phase, she's not coming back. So the real question is, can you read between the lines? Can you interpret subtlety as sincerity? Can you respond to presence without needing explicit invitation? Because the women who speak this way, the ones who operate through grace and careful intention, are the ones who often bring the most depth into a relationship. They don't crash in with chaos. They don't make a scene. They let you decide. And that decision reveals more about you than it ever does about them. You don't need fireworks to know something matters. Sometimes all it takes is paying attention to the silence that moves with purpose.